My name is Sienna Myers. I'm 34 years old, and I'm a master electrician. On Labor Day, at a cookout on my own back deck, my sister took her daughter's hand, pointed at my lake house, and said, "One day, sweetheart, this house will be yours." I almost choked on my lemonade. Then my mom turned to me with a smile. The kind of smile you give someone after the contract is already signed. So I set down my glass and asked the only question that mattered. "Since when do you have a say about my house?" Nobody laughed. Nobody looked embarrassed either. They looked at me the way you look at the last person in the room to hear the news. But here's what none of them knew that afternoon. The paperwork they thought would bury me was already sitting in a county building 40 minutes away. And what I found inside it turned Christmas dinner into the most expensive meal of their lives. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This channel is where quiet women finally tell the stories their families hoped they'd keep to themselves. Stories about boundaries, betrayal, and the price of peace. If stories like this speak to you, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Now, let me tell you how my family tried to take my house. I should back up, because you need to know what kind of woman they thought they were dealing with. I didn't go to college. At 19, I signed on as an apprentice electrician while my classmates were picking dorm furniture. 4 years of crawl spaces, attics in July, and journeymen who bet on how fast the girl would quit. I outlasted every one of them. By 30, I had my master's license and a van with my name on the door. Myers Electric. 1 woman. 1 van. A waiting list 3 weeks long. Electricity taught me the only philosophy I've ever needed. It doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care what you meant to do. It only cares whether you did the work. My dad understood that. Tom Myers, diesel mechanic. 40 years of grease under his nails. He was the one who slipped me his old multimeter when Mom said trade school wasn't ladylike. He died 8 years ago. Heart attack in the shop. Gone before the ambulance turned off Route 9. He carried a life insurance policy his whole working life, $150,000, paid straight to my mother. I never asked about that money. It was hers. Remember that, because it matters later. The other thing you should know about me is small and boring. Every night since my first apprentice year, I write a job log. Date, site, hours, materials, who said what. Old habit. When your work can burn a house down, you keep records. My dad left behind one thing that mattered more than the multimeter. I just didn't know yet how much it was going to cost me. 7 years ago, I bought a dying cottage on Wren Lake, just outside Birch Hollow, Wisconsin. Foreclosure listing, $118,000, and every dollar of the $24,000 down payment came out of a savings account I'd been feeding since I was 19. The bank practically apologized when they handed me the keys. The roof sagged like a tired horse. Mice had opinions about the kitchen. The wiring was original cloth-covered cable from the 50s, which is a polite way of saying the place was a campfire waiting for a match. I didn't care. It sat on the water. It was mine. And I knew how to fix everything wrong with it. I spent 7 years of weekends inside of those walls. I gutted the electrical down to the studs and ran every new circuit with my own hands. I pulled permits for all of it, passed every inspection, and filed every receipt, because that's what a licensed professional does. New panel? New well pump? Cedar dock. I built 2 boards at a time. There's a light over that dock I wired on the anniversary of my dad's death, and every time I flip that breaker, it feels like saying goodnight to him. People in town call it the Myers place now, not the foreclosure, the Myers place. 7 years of my life went into that house. It took my family one afternoon to decide it wasn't mine, and when I finally understood how they planned to pull that off, I realized the afternoon was just the performance. The real work had been done months earlier, quietly, in an office with a notary stamp. To explain my mother, I have to explain her favorite sentence. Donna Myers has never yelled at anyone in her life. She doesn't have to. She arranges things. She arranges seating charts, casseroles, holidays, and people. And by the time you notice you've been arranged, you're already in the chair she picked. And her whole system runs on one sentence I heard from the time I could walk. In this family, there is no yours. There is only ours. She said it when Rachel borrowed my bike and left it at the pool. She said it when relatives stayed in my room for a month and I slept on the couch. It sounds warm, doesn't it? Like a quilt. Until you notice the quilt only ever moves in one direction. What was Rachel's stayed Rachel's. What was mine circulated. By the time I was grown, I had a role in the family the way a toolbox has a shelf. When Mom's panel breathed smoke, I rewired it for free. When Rachel and Brett's water heater died in January, I drove the hour and 45 to Madison with a new one in my van. 2 Christmases ago, I did the ceiling fans in their whole house. Nobody ever offered gas money, and honestly, I never asked. Being needed felt close enough to being loved that I stopped checking the difference. And here's the part that took me years to see. Every job I did got retold at Sunday dinner as proof the system worked. Not, Sienna helped me. Always, this family takes care of its own. My work went in. The story that came out had no me in it. The Labor Day cookout was my idea, which is the joke of the whole thing. I'd finished the deck in August and I wanted to show it off. So the family came to me. Mom brought her potato salad. Rachel and Brett drove up from Madison with my niece Ava, who is 8 and the only member of this family whose motives I have never once questioned. It was a good afternoon, right up until it wasn't. Burgers, sweet corn, Brett telling golf stories nobody asked for. Around 4, I was coming out with a pitcher of lemonade when I saw Rachel walk Ava down to the end of my dock. She crouched to Ava's height, swept her arm across the water, the cedar boards, the house, my house, like a realtor at an open house. One day, sweetheart, this house will be yours. I laughed because I thought it was a joke. I actually took a sip of lemonade. That's how sure I was. Then I saw my mom's face. She turned to me from the picnic table with a smile I'd never gotten from her, not at my licensing ceremony, not at my closing. A settled smile, a smile like a signed contract, like it was already done and my part was just to hear about it. The lemonade went down wrong and I coughed until my eyes watered. And nobody moved. And when I got my breath back, I heard my own voice come out flat and level. Since when do you have a say about my house? The yard went quiet in that specific way, where even the lake seems to listen. And here's what scared me, though it took me weeks to name it. Nobody looked caught. Rachel looked at Mom. Mom looked at Brett. Brett looked at his beer and smiled like a man checking his watch. They weren't embarrassed like people whose secrets slipped out. They were awkward like people at a surprise party where the guest of honor showed up early. The party limped along another hour on small talk and potato salad. Then the goodbyes started, and that's when Brett made his move. He found me at the grill, scraping the grates, and picked up the tongs like he was helping. Brett sells insurance in Madison. He has a firm handshake, a golf tan, and a voice that's always about to do you a favor. "Hey," he said, low, friendly. "Don't take the house stuff so hard. Rachel just gets sentimental. But you know, a property like this, family should have a plan. Estate stuff. You're single, no kids. God forbid something happens to you, this all turns into a mess." I told him my estate plan was my business. He chuckled like I'd said something charming. Then he set down the tongs, patted my shoulder twice, and said the sentence I'd replay for the next 3 months. "Besides, this place isn't quite as yours as you think it is." And he walked off to load coolers into his SUV like he'd just commented on the weather. At the door, my mother took both my hands, pressed them, and gave me the settled smile again, softer this time. "We'll talk properly at Christmas, sweetheart. All of us. It's time we got things squared away." Squared away. I stood on my own deck watching their taillights climb the county road, and I felt it. That faint wrong smell you catch near an outlet before anything visibly burns. 20 years in the trade teaches you exactly one thing about that smell. It is never nothing. I'm not a person who lets a burning smell wait until morning, so Tuesday night I called my mother and asked her straight. "Mom, what did Brett mean? The house isn't as mine as I think." She did what she always does. She poured warm water on it. "Oh, honey. Brett only means the family should plan together. Your father would want us protected." "Protected from what?" I asked. She sighed the sigh she's been sighing at me since 1998, the one that means I was being difficult again, and changed the subject to whether I was coming for Thanksgiving. I called Rachel next. Rachel went the other way, irritated. Why are you always so defensive? Nobody's taking anything. It's a family conversation. Why can't we ever just have one of those? I wrote both calls down in my job log that night, word for word as best I remembered, dates and times. Old habit. I want to be clear. I heard the alarm. I didn't sleep on it. I just had no idea yet which wall the fire was inside. Meanwhile, I had my own plans cooking. That fall, I'd applied to refinance the lake house, pull $60,000 in equity, buy a second van, and finally take on an apprentice. 3 years I'd been building toward that. The loan officer said everything looked strong. Income solid. House appraising well. Last step was routine, she said. A title search. Standard, she said. Takes about a week. It took 3 days for my phone to ring, and when it did, the voice on the other end was very polite and very careful, the way people are when they're about to hand you a live wire. I was on a ladder in a farmhouse outside Birch Hollow, wire strippers in one hand, when the title company called. The woman introduced herself twice, which should have been my first clue. Ms. Myers, we found a recorded mortgage against your property that we need to clear up. A private mortgage. It secures a note for $85,000. I told her that was impossible. I had exactly one mortgage, with the credit union, and I could recite the balance in my sleep. This is a second instrument, she said. Private lender. I asked who the lender was. Paper rustled. And then she said my mother's name. Donna Myers. I stood on that ladder and looked at the stripped wire in my hand for what felt like a long time. There's been a mistake, I said. I never signed anything like that. And she said, gently, the sentence that ended the first 34 years of my life. Ma'am, it's recorded with the county. It's notarized. I'm looking at it right now. Recorded this past June. June. 3 months before the cookout. Before, one day this house will be yours. Before the settled smile. They hadn't slipped up at that barbecue. They'd been reading from a script that was already on file with the county. I climbed down, finished the junction box, because that's what you do, and then I sat in my van and asked her to email me the copy. If you've ever had a stranger read your own family's handwriting back to you over the phone, you know exactly how cold that cold is. Stay with me, because what I did next, I did quietly. And quiet is where this story sharpens. If you're still here, do me one favor and hit subscribe. The quiet ones always finish their stories. The next morning, I drove 40 minutes to the county courthouse and paid $2 for a copy of my own betrayal. The Register of Deeds office smells like old paper and toner, and the clerk was kind in the way people are kind at funerals. She printed the whole instrument: real estate mortgage, borrower, Sienna R. Myers, lender, Donna Myers, principal, $85,000, referencing a promissory note dated 7 years back. The same year I bought the house. As if my mother had lent me the money for it. As if I hadn't pulled that down payment out of my own savings, one teller visit at a time. And there, at the bottom, was my signature. Or something wearing its clothes. Whoever drew it had studied me, I'll give them that. But I've signed thousands of invoices since I was 19, and my M has carried the same long hook on the last leg for 15 years, a little flag I started adding as an apprentice so nobody could pencil in extra line items above my name. This M had no hook. The signature was smooth, careful, and dead, the way handwriting looks when it's been drawn instead of written. Below it sat a notary block, stamped and signed. Dale Hutchins. I knew that name. Dale golfs with Brett every Saturday from thaw to first snow. I stood at the counter and made myself read the recording date again. June 12th. While I was rewiring a dairy barn that week, somebody had walked into this building with a forged note, a forged mortgage, and a friendly stamp, and had quietly nailed an $85,000 lie to my house. The clerk asked if I needed anything else. I said yes, actually. Certified copies, 2 sets. She didn't ask why, and I didn't tell her that one set was for a lawyer I hadn't hired yet. The loan officer called that afternoon with the voice of a woman reading from a script her manager approved. The refinance was paused. "Cloud on title," she said. Nothing could move until the second mortgage was resolved, released, or adjudicated. Adjudicated. There's a word you never want attached to your own address. 3 years of planning went into the ice in one phone call. The second van I'd already test-driven. The apprentice posting I'd written and rewritten on my couch like it was a love letter. A 19-year-old somewhere wasn't getting the phone call I'd been dying to make, and she'd never know why. I sat in my van in the courthouse parking lot with the certified copies on the passenger seat. And I want to be honest about what happened next, because it's the whole reason I'm telling this story. Nothing happened. No tears in the parking lot. No screaming phone call to my mother. No message with the word betrayal in it. I reached into the back seat, took out my job log, and opened a fresh page. Date, time, event. Discovered recorded mortgage, county book, and page number. Parties. Donna Myers, lender of record. Dale Hutchins, notary. Suspected drafter, Brett Kowalski. Below that, I wrote the first rule they teach you in troubleshooting, the rule that has paid my bills for 15 years. Never assume the fault is where the smoke is. The smoke was an $85,000 note with my mother's name on it. But current has to come from somewhere. Somewhere upstream, something had shorted hard enough to need a lie this size to cover it. My job was to walk the circuit backward until I found the burn mark. So that's exactly what I did. I started with my sister, and I went in soft on purpose. You don't grab a wire to find out if it's hot. You test it. I called Rachel on a Sunday while she was folding laundry, kept my voice light, and dropped it in sideways. "Hey, weird question. Mom's been saying I owe her money on the house. Where's that coming from?" And Rachel didn't miss a beat. No pause, no guilt, nothing. "Well, you do. From Dad's insurance money. Mom lent you 85 grand for the lake house. Everybody knows that, sigh." I gripped the counter. Everybody knows. She said it the way you'd say the sky is blue, like it was family weather, a fact she'd lived alongside for years. I asked her when exactly this loan was supposed to have happened, and she got annoyed with me again. "Right when you bought it? Brett's handled all the paperwork stuff for Mom since Dad died. You know that. Honestly, it hurt her that you never even offered to pay it back, and she never once brought it up. That's how Mom loves people." I heard my sister's voice wobble with real feeling, real hurt, on Mom's behalf. At me, the ungrateful daughter of the story. That's when the floor of it opened up. Rachel wasn't lying to me. Rachel was reciting. Sometime in the last 7 years, while I was pulling wire and paying my own bills, somebody had rewritten our family history in the room where I wasn't standing, and my own sister had memorized the new edition without ever wondering who the author was. So the question stopped being, what does the family believe? The question became, who wrote it down first, and why did he need it to be 85,000? For family history that hasn't been edited, you go to my Aunt Lynn. She's my dad's younger sister, 66, sharp as a utility knife, and she has never once in her life pretended a casserole fixed anything. I drove out to her place with cider donuts and asked about the insurance money, and she talked because Lynn always talks straight. 150,000, she confirmed, paid to Donna within a couple months of the funeral. And Brett swooped in on it like a gull on a boat sandwich, she said. Some annuity thing he sells. Said he'd make it grow so Donna would never have to worry. Your mother signed whatever he put in front of her. She always lets the men do the paperwork, honey. Her father trained that into her early. I asked carefully whether Brett had ever had money trouble of his own. Lynn snorted into her coffee. That car wash. Excuse me? The car wash franchise, over in Madison. 5 years back. He put money in with some college buddy, strutted around one Thanksgiving calling himself an investor. Then it went belly up and nobody was allowed to mention it. Rachel told me once they'd had a rough stretch, then hushed up like she'd left the oven on. I drove home along the lake with my hands quiet on the wheel and the arithmetic doing itself. A pot of insurance money Brett controlled. a failed investment nobody could mention, and a forged note for $85,000, aged 7 years like a bottle of wine, waiting in a county file. The number on that note wasn't random. Numbers never are. Now I needed someone who could turn what I suspected into something a judge would read. Marisol Vega's office is above a bakery in Eau Claire, and she is the kind of lawyer who reads first and talks after. Real estate litigation, 20 years. I slid the certified copies across her desk and she went through them with a mechanical pencil, flagging pages, not saying a word for 10 minutes. Then she looked up. First, breathe. A forged instrument conveys nothing. In Wisconsin, in basically every state, a forged deed or mortgage is void from the moment it's signed. It doesn't matter that it's recorded. It doesn't matter that it's notarized. Void means it never legally happened. I asked why my refinance was frozen over something that never legally happened, and she gave me a thin smile. Because void doesn't mean invisible. That instrument sits in the public record like a dead raccoon in a wall. Everyone can smell it. Nobody can pretend it's not there, and it stays there until a judge orders it out. That's the lawsuit. It's called a quiet title action. We ask the court to declare the mortgage and the note void and strike the cloud from your record. And given what this looks like, we add a claim called slander of title. They published a false document against your property, and that has cost you real money. Then she laid out what winning requires. Proof the signature is forged. Proof the $85,000 never existed. Bank records, 7 years of them. And the notary. The notary is the soft spot. A notary is supposed to verify you, in person. If he stamped that without you standing in front of him, he's got a license to lose, and men protect their licenses. She quoted the retainer, $7,500, about the price of the van I was no longer buying, and asked one last question. Does your mother know it's forged? I said I didn't know. Vega clicked her pencil twice. With mothers, the question is usually not what they know, it's what they've decided not to know. Then she asked how much documentation I had. And for the first time that whole rotten week, I smiled. That night, I cleared my kitchen table, poured coffee I had no business drinking at 9 p.m., and brought in the gray binder. 3 rings, canvas cover gone soft at the corners, riding in my van since the day I closed on this house. My whole 7 years, hole punched. The job logs, every working day, date and site, and hours in my own hooked M handwriting. Every permit for this house with the county's own date stamps. Every inspection card, signed off. Receipts for wire, panels, the well pump, the cedar for the dock, folder by year. And the bank records I'd printed that afternoon. The savings account I fed from age 19. The $24,000 cashier's check for the down payment drawn from it, and 7 years of statements on every account I own, showing one thing with beautiful, boring clarity. No $85,000 ever arrived. Not as a lump, not in pieces, not ever. You can forge a signature. You cannot forge the absence of money. Brett had built his whole story out of one fabricated page. I had 7 years of Tuesdays. I sat there with my hand flat on the binder, and I made the decision that shaped everything after, the one Vega had walked me to the edge of that afternoon. No confrontation, no warning shots. I would not call my mother crying, would not storm Rachel's kitchen, would not give Brett one twitch of the panic that teaches a cornered man to shred paper. I'd stay the daughter they had on file. Helpful, quiet, a little cold since the cookout, nothing more. Thanksgiving would come, and I'd bring the green beans. Christmas would come, and they'd walk into it believing the table was set for me. Let them. Love isn't an invoice, but theft always leaves one. One piece was still missing, though, and I knew exactly which stamp was on it. Dale Hutchins runs a little insurance and tax storefront 2 towns over, and on Saturdays, he golfs with Brett. His stamp sat under my forged signature, swearing to the county that Sienna Myers had personally appeared before him. So Vega wrote him a letter, polite, on letterhead, asking him to confirm the circumstances of the notarization, when, where, what ID he checked. And while he sat on it, we built the trap he'd walk into. Though trap is the wrong word for a thing made entirely of true facts. The note claimed a signing date. The acknowledgement claimed I'd appeared. So I went to the binder and pulled that week. My own job log put me on the dairy barn rewire 2 hours away. And better. I was subbed in under a general contractor who keeps signed daily timesheets. 12-hour days, all week, my signature, hooked M and all, on every sheet, countersigned by his foreman. On the day Dale swore I stood in front of him, I was 2 hours away with my arms inside a conduit run, and the paper trail was thick enough to stand on. Dale's first reply was lawyer-shaped fog. He notarizes many documents, doesn't recall specifics. Vega answered with one paragraph that mentioned the state's notary regulations, the words revocation and referral, and a deadline. He called her office before the week was out. He'd signed as a favor, he admitted. Brett had brought a stack of family paperwork, said everyone had already signed, and Dale stamped it at his golf buddy's word, without me in the room, without me in the building, without ever meeting me in his life. He put it in an affidavit to keep his license breathing. Paper? Check. Money trail? Check. Now I wanted the one thing missing from my binder. His voice, saying it out loud. Before I could arrange that, my mother summoned me to dinner. Second Sunday of November, her house in town, 20 minutes in from the lake. Pot roast, the good tablecloth, candles. My mother sets a beautiful table when she's about to arrange you. She waited until I had food in front of me, then patted my hand and began. Christmas, sweetheart, we're all coming to the lake, and we're going to sit down as a family and get the house business settled, once and for all. I asked her evenly what business that was, and my mother, I have to hand it to her, never blinked. The loan, honey. Nobody's blamed you. Money got hard for you, I understand. You've never once been asked for a payment. But your father's money is in that house, so the house is family. You can square the debt if you'd rather. Or we simply put the family on the deed, the way it always should have been, and the whole thing is forgiven. Brett will have the papers ready. It's what your father would want. There it was. The whole mechanism in the candlelight. The forged debt as the crowbar, the deed as the door, and my dead father as the handle they'd wrapped around it. Squeeze or sign? I looked at her hands on mine and heard the sentence underneath, the one I was raised on. In this family, there is no yours. There is only ours. I said we'd talk at Christmas, and her face bloomed, and she cut me a second slice of pot roast like a woman sealing an agreement. Driving back to the lake, I watched her kitchen light shrink in the mirror and understood finally that she'd just offered to buy my whole life from me, and her voice never once left the register she uses for recipes. The last stretch of wire walked itself into my hands, the way it sometimes does when a job decides it's ready to be finished. Late November, my mother's bathroom fan died, and she called me to fix it. Of course she did. The daughter suing for her house in December is still the daughter with the tools in November, and I came, because the part of me that answers that phone may die last of anything I own. The fan took 20 minutes. On my way out through the den, I stopped to check the breaker panel I'd rewired for her years ago, and there on the shelf beside it sat the household file box, lid off, where Brett's paperwork has lived since Dad died. I didn't open drawers and I didn't pick locks. I photographed what lay in plain sight on top, because 3 lines in, my eye had already snagged. An annuity statement, writing agent, Brett Kowalski. Under it, letters confirming partial surrenders, years of them, each with a penalty line, each authorized by the neat, patient, level signature of Donna Myers. I've watched my mother sign checks at the kitchen table my whole life. Her hand shakes, a little more every year, and her D-lists left like a boat taking water. These Ds stood at attention. Every one, every year, identical. At home, I laid the photos beside my own forged note, and the handwriting told one story twice. Then I did the sums against what Lynn remembered, and the surrenders came to right around $85,000, drained in the exact seasons Brett's car wash was going under. He hadn't only forged my name once, he'd been forging hers for years, bleeding my father's insurance money out the back of that annuity, and when the hole got too big to hide from a widow who might someday ask, he'd stitched a false skin over it with my house. The loan story gave the missing money somewhere respectable to have gone, which left one question I genuinely couldn't answer yet. Was my mother his victim? Or just his silent partner in not asking? Wisconsin is a one-party consent state. That's the dry little fact this whole next part turns on, and Vega confirmed it before I moved. If I'm part of the conversation, I can lawfully record it, no permission needed from the other party. So the first week of December, I called Brett and asked to meet for coffee in Madison. Just us. I want to get to a good place before Christmas, I told him, and I let my voice sag exactly enough. He picked the coffee shop near his office where the guys from his firm could see him through the glass, being magnanimous. He ordered a caramel thing with a lid swirl and spent 5 minutes on the drive up from his golf trip. Then he leaned in, warm as a space heater, and did what men like Brett always do when they think they've won. He explained it to me. Look, Cy, nobody wants a war. The note's real enough where it counts, okay? I asked quietly what that meant, since I'd never signed it. And he smiled. Actually smiled, and said, Your signature? Close enough is good enough for family. Come on. Nobody's ever looking at that paper again after Christmas. It just makes the money make sense on paper. For your mom's peace of mind. You sign the house into the family arrangement at Christmas. The note evaporates. Everybody wins. You're not out $1. It's cleanup, that's all. Cleanup. My father's insurance. His failed car wash. My forged name. Cleanup. I asked one more question because the recorder in my chest pocket had room for it. And if I don't sign? He stirred his caramel swirl and shrugged. Then the family calls the loan, Cy. Don't make it ugly. You'd lose the house over pride. I thanked him for the coffee. I drove home with his voice sitting safe in my phone. People ask why I didn't scream at him right there in front of the glass. Because screaming is free, and I wanted this to cost them. If you've ever swallowed your anger and taken notes instead, tell me in the comments and hit subscribe. Because the bill comes due at Christmas, all I needed now was a dinner table. 2 days later, Vega spread the whole case across her conference table like a finished wiring diagram, and for the first time I saw it the way a judge would. Exhibit 1, the recorded mortgage and note, with the dead, hookless signature. Exhibit 2, Dale Hutchins's affidavit, sworn and notarized by somebody else for a change, admitting he stamped the acknowledgement without me present at Brett's request. Exhibit 3, the general contractor's timesheets, putting me 2 hours away on the claimed signing date, 12 hours a day, all week. Exhibit 4, 7 years of bank statements in which $85,000 conspicuously fails to appear, next to the cashier's check that actually bought this house. Exhibit 5, 20 seconds of Brett's own voice over a caramel latte. Close enough is good enough for family. Vega had the complaint drafted. Quiet title, slander of title, the works. And beside it, in its own folder, a memo she called the criminal referral. Forgery of a recorded instrument, a felony, if the district attorney felt like making it one. We don't fire that, she said. We just make sure they know it's loaded. Then she walked me through the choreography. File now, and have the papers served after the holiday, so the family would sit down at Christmas with the lawsuit already alive in the system whether they behaved or not. You can end this 2 ways, she said. A courtroom or a table. Most families pick the table, right up until they learn the courtroom is already booked. I was nodding, feeling almost steady, when she took off her glasses and asked the only question in the whole file with no exhibit attached. Sienna, the caption will read, Myers versus Myers, your mother's name, under the word defendant. Can you carry that? I looked at the folder for a long moment, and I didn't answer her yet. I took that question to the one person who knew my mother before she was my mother. Aunt Lynn poured coffee, listened to me get half a sentence out, and then told me a story I'd never heard in 34 years. 1986, she said. Your mom was 24. Her father called her into the kitchen of that farmhouse out on Percher Road, set a paper on the table and told her to sign it. The farm was going to her little brother. All of it. The girls signed off their shares. That's just how his people did it. Daughters don't hold land. I asked what Mom did. She signed it, honey. What else? Then she went and stood in the yard for about an hour, and when she came in, she was the Donna you grew up with. Started talking about family the way drowned people talk about water. Married your dad 2 years later and the house went in his name, and I never once heard her complain. Lynn turned her cup a slow half-circle. Your mother wasn't born believing in ours, Sienna. She was built into it. Now she's the one holding the bill pad, and I don't think she can tell anymore whether she's collecting or paying. I sat in my truck outside Lynn's place for a long time, and I'll tell you the truth of what happened in that cab. The need I'd been strangling all fall got loose and made its case. It said, $85,000 is just money. You've rebuilt bigger wrecks than her. Pay it. Absorb it. Keep your mother. I sat with that until my hands got cold. Then my phone lit up. Not a Christmas card. A letter had come to the house, and the return address was a law office. The letter was on cream paper from a Madison firm I'd never heard of, and it was addressed to me like I was a stranger, which, credit where due, was the most honest thing my family had put in writing all year. Promissory note in the amount of $85,000. Demand for payment in full, plus accrued interest by December 31st. Failure to cure, it said, would leave their client no choice but to pursue all remedies, including foreclosure under the recorded mortgage. Their client, Donna Myers. My mother had hired a lawyer to foreclose on her own daughter by New Year's, and while that letter was in the mail, the other half of the operation was already running, because that same week my phone started warming up with relatives. A cousin, just checking in, who worked around to how hard this all was on my poor mother. Then my great-aunt calling from Arizona, pained. Sienna, honey, whatever's gone on, just pay your mother back. It's only money. It's your mother. Somewhere between the pot roast and the demand letter, Donna had rolled out the family edition of events, the one where I'd taken my dead father's insurance money and grown too proud to repay it. My name was being quietly rewired in a dozen kitchens across 3 states, and there was no version of the truth I could tell that didn't sound like an ungrateful daughter making ugly accusations at a grieving widow. So I didn't tell any. I punched the letter into the binder, front section, where Vega's paralegal would scan it in the morning. Because a demand letter built on a forged note isn't pressure. It's evidence with a postmark. They wanted me cornered before Christmas. They forgot who they were dealing with. Corners are where the main panel goes. Rachel called me at 11:40 on a Tuesday night, which is not a Rachel hour, and her voice came out small in a way I hadn't heard since we were kids sharing a wall. See, Brett said you signed it. The note. You did sign it, right? And there it was, at last. A question mark. The first one my sister had spent on this in 7 years. I stood at the kitchen window looking at the frozen lake and felt the old pull to dump everything. The hookless M, the timesheets, Dale's affidavit, the caramel latte confession sitting in my phone like a loaded staple gun. Vega's voice in my head said, "Not yet, not through her. She sleeps next to him." So I gave my sister one sentence to take to bed instead. Ask him to show you the pen I used. Silence. Long enough that I could hear their refrigerator hum in Madison. When Rachel spoke again, she wasn't defending anybody anymore. She was somewhere out past that, in open water. Whatever you think you have to do, she said, don't do anything crazy at Christmas. Please, Ava will be there. I told her the truest thing I said all December. Rachel, I'm not the one you should be saying that to. After she hung up, I stood there a while, watching snow start over the lake, and understood that the job at that dinner had changed shape on me. The deed would survive Christmas fine. Vega had seen to that. But there was going to be an 8-year-old in my living room while the grown-ups took the family apart. A girl who'd been promised my house the way you promise, a kid the moon, meaning nothing, costing everything. Whatever I did at that table, I would do it in a way Ava never had to watch. December 18th, 4 in the afternoon, Vega's conference room with the bakery smell coming up through the floor. The complaint sat squared on the table, and the caption ran exactly the way she'd warned me it would. Sienna R. Myers, plaintiff, v. Donna Myers, Brett Kowalski, and Dale Hutchins, defendants. My mother's name, under that word. I read it top to bottom twice. Every count. The quiet title, the slander of title, the declaration that the note and mortgage were void, forged, legal nothings. It was all true, and it was all mine, and signing it meant becoming a woman no one in my family had ever been. The daughter who takes her mother to court. I want to be honest. My hand didn't shake, and that surprised me. Love isn't an invoice, but theft always leaves one, and somebody has to be willing to read it out loud. I signed the verification. Vega's paralegal filed it electronically before I got my coat on. Somewhere in a courthouse server, Myers vs. Myers began to exist, time-stamped, real, no longer a thing I could take back by being sweet at dinner. The same afternoon, a second envelope went out. My complaint to the State Insurance Commissioner's office about Agent Brett Kowalski, with the annuity statements and the row of standing at attention signatures attached. Vega held service back like a good stage manager. The sheriff's deputy wouldn't hand anyone papers until the day after Christmas. The dinner is their last chance to pick the easy version, she said. That's a gift, whether they see it or not. I drove home along the lake in the blue dark. The old life, the helpful daughter, the free repairs, the seat they kept me in, ended somewhere on that road, quietly, without skid marks. Now all that was left was to set the table. I offered to host Christmas Eve myself, and the offer went over like free money. Of course they said yes. To them, it meant the stubborn one had softened. Better yet, it meant the signing could happen in the house itself, which Brett probably found poetic. Mom called it lovely, and said she'd bring the ham, and told me, warmly, I think even sincerely, that Dad would be so happy we were doing this. I spent the 23rd cooking like it was a real Christmas, because for one person in that house it would be. Ava was coming. So, the good tablecloth, cocoa mix, a gingerbread kit for the coffee table, white lights on the porch, every circuit of them mine. I hung a wreath on the front door and caught myself standing back to check it was centered, the way you do when your mother is coming, and I noticed, with something between a laugh and a bruise, that after everything, some stubborn breaker in me still wanted Donna Myers to walk in and say the wreath looked nice, knowing better All Fall hadn't tripped it. Maybe nothing ever would. In the kitchen drawer, under the pot holders, waited the other Christmas, the gray binder, tabbed and ordered, and 2 brown envelopes with Vega's letterhead inside. My phone sat charged to full, the recording cued, tested twice. Vega herself was on call until 10, a thing she does not do for everyone, her cell number written on a card in my back pocket like a fire extinguisher. I did a last walk through the way I do before an inspection, table, drawer, phone, envelopes, exits. Then I turned on the porch lights. They arrived at 6, smiling. All of them, smiling. Even me. For 2 hours it was almost a family. The ham was good. Ava built her gingerbread house on the coffee table and taxed every roof candy heavily. Brett poured wine and told a story about a sand trap. Mom said my potatoes were nearly as good as hers, which in Donna currency is a medal. I watched them be warm and easy in my living room and thought, this is what it would cost me nothing to keep. Nothing except the house, the truth, and the rest of my spine. Then, at 8, with cocoa on the stove for Ava, I saw my mother catch Brett's eye and nod, the smallest arrangement of the evening. Brett wiped his mouth, went to his coat, and came back with a leather folder, the kind with a zipper, and set it by the gravy boat like a 5th dish. So, he said, Sonny, before it gets late, family property agreement, clean and simple. Donna and Rachel go on the deed with you. The note gets torn up the same night. And this beautiful place is officially what it's always really been. Ours. He unzipped the folder. The papers inside were laser crisp, tabbed where I was meant to sign, and across the table he set a fat black pen down and turned it, deliberately, so the tip pointed at me. My mother folded her hands and smiled the settled smile, the Labor Day smile, the one from the dock. Rachel looked at her plate. In the living room, Ava hummed to her gingerbread. I looked at the pen aimed at me across my own tablecloth, and I stood up, and I heard my voice come out the way it does on a job site when something is about to get shut off. Before anyone signs anything, I have 2 envelopes of my own. First things first. I walked to the living room, crouched by the gingerbread house, and told Ava the upstairs TV had the good Christmas movies and she could take the whole candy bowl with her. Rachel understood before I'd finished the sentence. Mothers hear rooms change pressure. And she took Ava up herself, tucked her in with the movie loud, and came back down with her arms crossed over her sweater like a woman walking into weather. I'll always give my sister that. She came back down. Then I opened the kitchen drawer and set the evening's real place settings next to Brett's leather folder. The gray binder. 2 brown envelopes. Brett's smile developed a support beam. I opened the binder to the first tab and turned it to face them. This is a certified copy of a mortgage recorded against this house in June. $85,000. Lender, Donna Myers. This is the note behind it, dated 7 years ago. And this, I turned the page, is the signature on it. It's a nice signature, it isn't mine. Brett started up. Now, hold on. If you're going to wave papers around. And I set the next tab down without raising my voice at all. Signed timesheets, a general contractor's daily logs, a week of 12-hour days 2 hours from the notary's office. The day I supposedly stood in front of a notary and signed, I was wiring a dairy barn in another county. 12-hour shifts, signed in and signed out, all week, countersigned by the foreman. My mother's hands stayed folded, but her thumbs had stopped being still. Brett reached for the binder. I slid it 6 inches out of his range, the way you move a drink from a man who's had enough, and said, "I'm not finished." I turned to the next tab. Dale Hutchins signed an affidavit 3 weeks ago. He never met me, Brett, not once in his life. He says you brought him a stack of family paperwork and told him everyone had already signed, and he stamped it as a favor. He put that in writing to keep his license. Brett's tan started working alone. The skin under it had gone to drywall. Then there's the money. I laid down the bank tab. 7 years of statements. Every account I have. $85,000 never arrived. No lump, no pieces, nothing. You can forge a signature. You can't forge money that never moved. And then I took out my phone, set it flat in the middle of the tablecloth like a trivet, and pressed play. 20 seconds. His own voice, cheerful, caramel smooth, filling my dining room. Your signature? Close enough is good enough for family. It just makes the money make sense on paper. Sign the house into the family arrangement at Christmas, the note evaporates, everybody wins. Brett came out of his chair so fast it went over backward, and the crash rolled through the house like a breaker slamming. "You recorded me!" he shouted, finger out, wine sloshing. "That's illegal, you can't—" "One-party consent," I said. "Wisconsin, I was the one party. Check with your lawyer, you'll have one by Thursday." But here's the thing I noticed, the thing I'll remember on my last day. My mother wasn't looking at the phone. She was looking at the last thing I'd laid down, photographs of annuity surrender forms from the file box beside her own breaker panel, years of withdrawals, each one authorized by a Donna Myers signature that stood straight and steady and identical, while her real hand has listed left and trembled worse every year of her widowhood. She looked at $85,000 of her dead husband's money, drained through signatures she never signed, and for the first time in my life, I watched my mother's face get old. Then she closed it like a store for the night, looked up at me and said, cold and even, "In this family, there is no yours." I nodded, because I'd been waiting my whole life to finally hear it plainly. "No, Mom. In this family, there was no me." I picked up the first brown envelope and put it in front of Brett, on top of his leather folder, which had stopped existing as far as the table was concerned. Envelope A, my lawyer drafted it. It's a written confession and settlement. You admit you fabricated the note and the mortgage. in a form we can record, so the county file gets cleaned of your fingerprints. You self-report to the state insurance commissioner within 30 days. And you pay my mother back the $85,000 you took out of Dad's annuity, on a schedule, every dollar. In exchange, I drop my damages claim, and I don't spend one more calorie helping the district attorney find you interesting. Then the second envelope, in the middle of the table, for everyone. Envelope B is a courtesy copy. Myers versus Myers. Quiet title, slander of title, forgery, filed 6 days ago. It's already alive. A deputy serves it the day after tomorrow, no matter what happens to the ham. The lawsuit exists either way. Tonight only decides how it ends. Brett cycled through his whole catalog then, and I stood still for all of it. The bluster. No court's going to take your word. The bargaining. Okay, look. The note goes away. We tear it up right now. Clean slate. And finally, quieter, with his tie crooked, something close to honest. See. The franchise was already under. I was going to put it all back. It was family money, it wasn't. It wasn't stealing. From the kitchen doorway, where she'd stood with her arms crossed since she came back down, my sister spoke for the first time all night, and her voice had gravel in it I'd never heard. The car wash, Rachel said. You told me your mother helped us through that year. Brett shut his eyes. And that sound you couldn't hear. That was 17 years of a marriage recalculating. Rachel walked to the table, read envelope A standing up. All of it. Then set it down in front of her husband and put her hand flat on top. Sign it, she said. Or I will drive her to the district attorney myself, and I'll carry the binder. That was when my mother stood up. Not fast. She rose the way she rises at the end of Thanksgiving, hostess straight, gathering the room to herself, and she looked at me, past the binder, past Brett sweating over the envelope, past her own forged name lying face up on the table, and she said it with no heat at all, which is how I knew she meant it as law. If you make him sign that, you are not my daughter anymore. The room stopped. Rachel's head came around. Brett froze mid-reach like a man in musical chairs. And I stood there at the head of my own table and finally saw it whole. She'd watched the evidence come down layer by layer. The forged note, the tapped dry annuity, her own stolen signature. And the crime she chose to name was mine, the disobedience. She would forgive the man who robbed her before the daughter who proved it. And that wasn't madness. That was the house style. The one her father taught her at a farmhouse kitchen table in 1986, with a paper and a pen and a sentence about what daughters don't hold. And she had been paying that bill forward for 40 years, and here it was at last, arriving at me, the way it had arrived at her. Take the family, or take what's yours. For one breath, I saw the yard she must have stood in for an hour at 24, and I understood I'd spent 34 years being billed for a debt she'd never once been able to say out loud. Then I picked up the pen. My pen. From the kitchen drawer, not Brett's fat black one. And I slid it across the tablecloth to Brett, and I heard my own voice come out level and done. Then I guess I was never your daughter. Just your contractor. Brett looked at Rachel. Rachel didn't blink. He signed all 4 places, and his signature, I noticed, came out shaky and alive. The only honest one on any paper in this story. My mother took her coat off the hook, stopped 1 second in front of the wreath on my door, and walked out into the snow without turning around. The door clicked. That was all. The car pulled away and the house went quiet the way it does after a breaker trips. One hard thud, then nothing but everything still standing. Brett sat with his hands flat on the table, staring at the folder he'd zipped shut, and asked, to nobody in particular, if he could still be there in the morning. Rachel said, "You can drive me and Ava home, then we'll see about mornings." I photographed every signed page and sent the scans to Vega, who answered from her sister's Christmas party in under a minute. Received. It's done. Get some sleep, Ms. Myers. Rachel and I did the dishes side by side without a word, the way we used to when we were short enough to need the step stool, and somewhere around the roasting pan she finally said it. I didn't know, Cy, But I didn't look either. That's not the same as innocent, is it? I handed her the towel. No, I said, but it's the start of something better. Upstairs, Ava was asleep in the glow of the TV menu screen with the candy bowl defended in the crook of her arm, and I stood in the doorway a minute and let Christmas be Christmas. Then I went down and turned the house off, switch by switch, every circuit mine, until just the dock light was left burning out over the ice, the one I wired for my dad. Good night. The paperwork took another 9 weeks. The quiet took longer. 9 weeks later, on a gray Thursday in February, a circuit court judge signed the order in Myers versus Myers. The note and the mortgage were declared void. Forged, legal nothings, struck from my title like they'd never breathed, and the county record went back to saying the one true thing it had said for 7 years. This house belongs to Sienna R. Myers. Brett's recorded confession made it a stipulation, not a war. Nobody testified. Nobody's Christmas got subpoenaed. Vega billed me, shook my hand, and told me I was the best documented client of her career, which from her is roughly a parade. The refinance closed in March. The second van is white and ugly and perfect, and in April, a 19-year-old named Dakota with a nose ring and a dead-serious notebook became Myers Electric's first apprentice. She writes everything down. I didn't even have to tell her. Brett self-reported, per the agreement. The insurance commissioner's office opened its file, and by summer his license was gone. Turns out regulators read confessions all the way through. He pays my mother back monthly, on a schedule with teeth in it. Rachel took Ava to her own place for a while. I don't know what happens to that marriage, and it's not my circuit to trace. What I know is that my sister calls before she visits now, asks instead of assumes, and shows up some Saturdays with coffee and a level, learning which end of a screwdriver is which. Rebuilding with boundaries is slower than believing. It also actually holds. My mother has not spoken to me since the door clicked. She cashed Brett's first repayment check. I know that much. And at Easter she told a table full of relatives, her side of a story I've stopped auditing. Some of them believe her. I let them. I spent my whole life trying to win a case in a courtroom that was never going to seat me, and I'm out of filings. She kept her word, is how I've come to think of it. It's the first bill she ever sent me honestly. And in May, on the first warm Saturday, Ava stood on my dock throwing bread to fish that don't need it, and out of nowhere, the way kids drop grenades, she asked, "Is this house really going to be mine someday?" I sat down on the warm cedar next to her and took my grandfather's old yellow-handled screwdriver out of my pocket. My dad's before it was mine. "One day, sweetheart, you're going to build something of your own," I said, and put it in her hands. "And I'll teach you how." She turned it over, weighed it, the way you weigh a real thing against a promised one. Then she asked if we could fix something right now, and we spent the afternoon rewiring the dock light together, her holding the flashlight dead steady, me doing the splices, both of us signing our work in the log when we were done. 2 entries, 2 names. Hers has a little flower on the end. Give it 15 years, and God help anyone who pencils a line above it. I spent 34 years believing love was a job I could finish if I just kept showing up with my tools. But a house needs your name on it, and any love that demands your name off things was never love, it was rent. That's my story. 1 forged page, 7 years of Tuesdays, and a Christmas dinner where the bill finally arrived. If this reminded you to pull your own title records, or to stop paying rent on love that was never coming, take it as a sign and do it this week. Share this with someone who keeps the lights on for everyone else. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.